media is quite sure how to handle President Trump's explosive charges yesterday, given the lack of evidence and the fact that he personally blamed his predecessor. Now, during the uproar over Jeff Sessions, who recused himself from any investigation over his previously undisclosed contacts with the Russian ambassador, President Trump tweeted this: "Terrible. Just found out that Obama had my wires tapped in Trump Tower just before the victory. Nothing found. This is McCarthyism." Also, how low has President Obama gone to tap my phones during the very sacred election process? This is Nixon, Watergate, bad or sick guy. Joining us now to analyze the coverage of this increasingly murky story, Aaron McPike, White House correspondent for Independent Journal Review. Katie Pavlich, editor at townhall.com and a Fox News contributor. And Michael Tomasky, columnist for the Daily Beast. All right, so how should the media treat these presidential tweets about wiretapping with incredibly strong language when the President of the United States so far has offered no evidence?
You have to figure out why he said what he said. Where is the evidence? And I think that's what you're seeing from a number of news organizations going after the story. What was it that made Donald Trump tweet that? Now, in the tweet that you just showed, he said, "just found out." When did he find out, and what did he find out?
Right. Some of this is tied to past news stories, Katie. We'll get into that in a moment. But as I said, it seems murky, and I think the media's default position would be, well, the president's just trying to distract from, let's say, the Jeff Sessions controversy, except he's distracting in a direction that takes us back to the whole question of Russia and the Trump campaign.
Right. I think that the president is, as you mentioned, talking about a specific incident when he found out just now. But it's important for the media to cover it in the sense of giving some context about maybe when this would have happened. There were reports from last summer of the Obama Justice Department and the FISA court asking for a warrant to go into Trump Tower and observe a server there. There were questions about Paul Manafort's involvement with the Russian government. So there is some context that needs to be provided. On the other hand, I think that we have to put the media in a position where they can remind people of what the Obama administration really did. I mean, it's not uncommon that the Obama administration went after their political enemies with the use of the government. Let's not forget that the Obama Justice Department collected phone calls and emails of reporters and news executives. They also had the IRS go after Tea Party groups. I mean, this is not something that is out of the question, but the President of the United States, Donald Trump, does have an obligation to provide proof if he's going to make such a clear, well, unclear, but such a staunch accusation about what has happened.
Well, I want to come back to that, but Michael, the president was apparently spurred by a long monologue by Mark Levin, the conservative radio host, which was then picked up by Breitbart, former Steve Bannon website, and run by Bannon, and that seems to be why he went on this Saturday morning tweet storm. Does any of that raise questions for you?
Sure. I mean, well, the questions it raises are about Trump and his mental processes. I mean, most presidents, before they said something like that, would want to talk to their FBI, would want to talk to the Justice Department lawyers, would want to talk to somebody official and try to find out the official thing. Trump doesn't roll that way. We know that already. You know, one of the oldest adages in the American political journalism business is if the president says it, it's news. So I guess, you know, Trump said it or tweeted it, it's news, it needs to be covered, but it needs to be covered with all the caveats that I saw mostly included in what.
Right. Well, one of the questions is even if the FBI got to this FISA National Security Court in the course of an investigation involving Russia, we actually don't even know whether that request was granted, but would President Obama personally have had any involvement with that? A spokesman for Barack Obama putting out a statement saying neither President Obama nor any White House official ever ordered surveillance on any U.S. citizen, and a suggestion otherwise is simply false. And Aaron, Sean Spicer, the press secretary, tweeting just about 10 or 15 minutes before the Sunday shows began today, that the reports about this, what he calls potentially politically motivated investigations, are very troubling. The president would like the Hill intelligence committees to expand their investigation to include this. In other words, what did the Obama administration do? And then neither the White House nor the president will comment further. That sounds like an effort to kind of shut it down.
It is, and I would also point out that he didn't just tweet that. The White House put out an official statement from Sean Spicer saying that. Now, I think that was in part to preempt from the press asking questions about this all week long at the briefings, because he obviously wants to turn the page.
By the way, good luck with that.
Right, exactly. I'm sure all of those questions will come, but they obviously want to talk about repealing Obamacare, which is supposed to be on the docket next week in some fashion, and the new travel ban.
Right. Well, we often get accused of we're chasing the latest flap controversy scandal, but in this case, the President of the United States will put it in play. Let me just play for you, Katie, an exchange on ABC's This Week between one administration official who was out there today on the shows, that is a Deputy Press Secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and Martha Raddatz. Take a look.
Let's look into this. If this happened, if this is accurate, this is the biggest overreach and the biggest scandal.
The President of the United States is accusing the former president of wiretapping him.
I think that this is, again, something that if this happened, Martha,
If.
Well, it's hard to hear Martha Raddatz say if, when for the last week we've heard all these questions about Senator Al Franken asking Jeff Sessions a question that was full of ifs, this is true, if there is evidence, if. I mean, the media runs on if things are true or not. So this idea that the president can't make that accusation is interesting coming from the question that she's asking.
Just to give a little context, so, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is out there saying, well, there are questions and they should be investigated. Fine, I'm in favor of getting to the bottom of this.
Sure.
But what Martha Raddatz and other journalists have been arguing is the president stated it as fact. He didn't say allegations.
Right.
He didn't say he heard this. He said this happened. And as Michael says, you can't not cover it. And
of course not. Right?
And yet we don't know if there's any there.
This is certainly a story that the media should be covering. But if the media is now going to lecture about covering things when there's no there, or accusing the president when they've been covering things for months that really have no evidence, it doesn't really hold a lot of credibility. Now, when it comes to the White House and what they're saying, the president, again, we've been saying this for a long time, cannot just go out and say things without evidence of the claim. And he's put his team into a position where they then have to defend it. And they're saying that they're not going to comment on it because if there is an ongoing investigation, they can't comment on it because it's an ongoing FBI investigation. And there's not a lot of information they can give because people are investigating whether a crime was committed.
The president's team didn't know this was coming, would put them at a further disadvantage. And at the same time, some of the media are just covering this as if it's a conspiracy theory.
Look, anybody can accuse anybody of anything. If you're just going to make stuff up about people, anybody can accuse anybody of anything. The point is, both for politicians and for journalists who are in public life and have a responsibility to watch what they say, the point is to make sure there's some kind of grounds for what you're saying about people, whether we're writing it or whether a politician is saying it about another politician. And the coverage of that, when somebody doesn't offer evidence and doesn't seem to have any basis for it that we know about, should be extremely skeptical.
Let me just add, the president hasn't liked leaks. He hasn't liked all of these stories about what's going on inside the White House
Yes.
between all the infighting.
Right.
But he is adding to that because CNN posted a video of a big fight happening inside the Oval Office. He is now kind of at odds with his staff, with, as you said, Sean Spicer putting out this statement trying to shut it down after the president tweeted about this. I mean,
the other hand,
there's back and forth. Maybe there's open war between Trump and his staff.
On the other hand, CNN had a banner headline I saw yesterday, President falsely accuses Obama of wiretapping. I have no evidence that it happened, but I am going to just sort of reserve judgment on the details involving FBI, Russia. And that brings us back to Jeff Sessions, who, there was a sudden firestorm over a Washington Post story reporting that kind of despite what he told the Senate confirmation hearing, that he had had a couple of contacts, one substantive in his office as a senator, with the Russian ambassador. Here is the Attorney General talking about it with Tucker Carlson.
Do you see this as a witch hunt?
I don't think what was said about that meeting I had with the Russian ambassador was legitimate. I think it was hyped beyond reason, and I think it was unfair.
The reason Tucker asked that question is that the president said this is a total witch hunt. The Democrats lost the election and now have lost their grip on reality. But when Jeff Sessions, who says that he didn't intend to mislead the committee and he was answering a narrower version of the question, not as a campaign surrogate, when he says it's hyped, wasn't the Washington Post story accurate?
The Washington Post story was accurate. I don't think the reporting on this necessarily was the problem. The reporting was about meetings that occurred. Again, there was no context of what was discussed in the meetings. There's no proof of any wrongdoing. There was no proof of any collusion between Senator Jeff Sessions as a campaign surrogate and the Russian ambassador. So, you know,
and yet the Attorney General on his own decided to recuse himself because the appearance would be, as he himself
right, because
said,
he is loyal
that he can't be
and
impartial.
I think he deserves a lot of credit for this because he is loyal to the law, he is loyal to the process. It wasn't that there was a conflict of interest or that there was impartiality, it's that there was an appearance of it and he knew that. And as someone who believes in not having that being an issue, he recused himself. I think he deserves a lot of credit for it. But I will say that the reason why it got so hyped, as Attorney General Sessions talked about, is because Democrats went after him. And yet, here we have this long list of Democrats who also met with the Russian ambassador last year and in years before, because it's part of the job description when it comes to being a senator.
Meeting with the Russian ambassador,
but they made it seem like there was.
The question was he completely candid with the Senate committee? And Michael, this brings me to the question of hypocrisy, because a lot of liberal pundits did not criticize the Loretta Lynch and her meeting with Bill Clinton while the Hillary investigation was going on. Now they're up in arms. They want Sessions to resign. And conservative pundits flip depending on which administration is in the dock on this sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, welcome to Washington.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, this is always going to happen, and you know, we've got Supreme Court hearings on Neil Gorsuch coming up, and we're going to see Democrats doing things that Republicans would have done while Obama was president, Republicans doing things vice versa. I mean, this is just politics, and you seek political advantage. It's not really shocking or offensive to me.
You are right. Welcome to Washington, but I think it undercuts the credibility of people who have sort of selective outrage. Let me get a break. You can email us about the media. MediaBuzz at foxnews.com. Ahead, a New York Times columnist on Trump calling his paper evil. But when we come back, pundits on the left and right gushing over the president's speech to Congress. How did that happen? Even some President Trump's toughest critics in the media had words of praise for his speech to Congress this week, a stunning contrast with the largely negative coverage of his first month in office.
The time for small thinking is over. The time for trivial fights is behind us.
Tonight, this is easily the most presidential that he's been.
This was the best speech of his political career, his short political career.
I want to say this right, but I feel like tonight Donald Trump became the president of the United States.
There are a lot of people who have a lot of reason to be frustrated with him, to be fearful of him, to be mad at him. But that was one of the most extraordinary moments you have ever seen in American politics, period.
Katie Pavlovich, with all of that praise, and it really was kind of across the political spectrum with a few exceptions, was there an undertone of, we really didn't think he was capable of this?
Definitely. I mean, based on especially the media's relationship with President Trump saying fake news, all that kind of thing, I was surprised to see such openness to the things that he was saying. And I think on the president's, to give him some credit, it wasn't just what he said and the words that came out of his mouth, it was his tone and the things that he decided to address. There weren't any personal attacks on his usual foes and what he would call enemies, right? And when you contrast this or compare it to the campaign, let's not forget that when President Trump and then candidate Trump talked about real issues, that's when he came up in the polls and actually started catching Hillary Clinton. In the last month, we've seen his approval rating go down because it's been a lot of back and forth, focusing on petty issues. I think when you look at that speech, he goes back to focusing on real issues that can affect everyone rather than his own personal pet peeves or problems that he has with certain issues.
CNN's Van Jones was talking about that emotional moment with the widow of the fallen Navy SEAL, but even many people on your side of the spectrum, Michael, called this a speech optimistic, uplifting, calling for unity. He didn't really change his positions on much of anything, but very rare praise for this president.
Yeah, it is true that he didn't change his positions. He just made them sound nicer. But, I mean, he deserved credit for that. I wrote a reasonably favorable column about the speech myself.
Was that hard for you to write?
No.
Were you grimacing when you wrote that?
No, I gave it to him. It's fine. I mean, expectations were low and strange. I mean, people expected him, I don't know, to talk about Arnold Schwarzenegger's bad ratings or whatever, the failing New York Times. And he didn't do any of that. So he looked like a president for an hour.
Well, to that point, I wrote a story, covered the speech, and talked about how it was a hope-filled speech, and he reached out to Democrats, as he did throughout the speech, and enemies and foes. And some of the criticism of the story I wrote was, I'm surprised you covered the speech straight. as opposed to they don't expect it. And I couldn't believe it, actually.
But my theory of this is this speech was how the pundits, the media in general, want Trump to behave, to be reasonable sounding and bipartisan sounding, and not engage in all the attacks. And they don't like when he's firing off things on Twitter and is kind of chaotic and is attacking the press among others. So that's, I think, one of the reasons there was, well, yeah, maybe this could be a president. And of course, 24 hours later, everyone's talking about Jeff Sessions.
Well, right, but quite frankly, it's not just pundits or his foes who want him to behave in a more presidential manner. If you talk to Trump supporters, especially reluctant Republicans who voted for him, they really wish he would just put the Twitter feed away, or at least have it be something that isn't a reactionary tool and more of a proactive thing, not used to attack people on non-substantive issues. So that speech gave them that confidence. But yes, the next day we were talking about our Attorney General Jeff Sessions, which wasn't of the Obama or of the Trump administration's doing.
It was a Washington Post story.
Washington Post
story. So just briefly, did you get any feedback, or did you notice what people say? You DC pundits are so easy. One speech and now suddenly you're all let's kiss and make up.
Sure, of course. There was a whole lot of that, and there was a really interesting debate playing out over the course of the week over that moment with this Navy SEAL's widow. The press are suckers for moments like that. I did notice that some military people tweeted that they thought it was kind of manipulative. So there was a debate about it.
There's a long tradition that I didn't personally have any problem with it. By the way, as far as petty fights, the president did yesterday tweet at Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was leaving Celebrity Apprentice. In fairness, Arnold blamed Trump for his lack of success on the show. All right, Aaron McPike, we'll see you later. Katie Pavlich, Michael Tomasky, thanks for joining us this Sunday. Ahead, a Trump spokeswoman will join us to respond, but up next, Vice President Pence wants an apology from the AP, and he isn't getting one. We'll tell you why in a moment. Vice President Pence is upset with the Associated Press, and for good reason. The AP have been covering a perfectly legitimate story about Pence using a private email account as governor of Indiana to conduct some state business. But a follow-up piece published the personal AOL address of his wife, Karen, an active account that now had to be shut down. The VP's counsel telling the Associated Press, you should be ashamed of your reprehensible conduct. Joining us now is Susan Ferricchio, chief congressional correspondent of the Washington Examiner. Do you see any justification for printing the AOL address of Mike Pence's wife and not even bothering to check whether that's an account she still uses?
So those are two questions. So the first is whether it's justified. AP is reporting that they were both used to conduct official business, and there's a whole transparency fight going on whether Pence should release those emails. He's supposed to by law. He's fighting it in court. So that's a legitimate question. And second is, should they have asked first whether the account was still active? In most cases, I know just as a reporter myself that that's something I would have checked, because you don't want to, we try to avoid things like posting people's personal addresses,
that's exactly what
phone
it's
numbers.
like. Here's the block they live on, and that's what it is.
Their license plate numbers. Now, you can argue she's a private citizen, but she's also the second lady. You can argue she works in an official capacity as well. She has her own staff. She does public events.
I'm not arguing she's a private citizen, but it wasn't like the story said, well, here's this bombshell email that Karen Pence sent. It just kind of threw in the address. The vice president himself has asked for an apology. The AP says, well, we stand by the story.
The question wasn't about the story.
Yeah, but no correction, no editor's note. The AP did delete the address from subsequent, I guess, online versions of the story. And so I can see where that would be frustrating for the vice president and his family, and I don't really see what warranted publishing the address. So, report that she had a personal account, fine.
I think it was a mistake. I think that it was an oversight, that they didn't check to see if that account was still active. And they admit such when they say, we thought it wasn't active. Once we realized the account was still used, we took it down. Well, it's too late now, obviously. And of course, you always try to draw the comparison. Well, what would have happened if it was Michelle Obama or Dr. Joe Biden? I know from reading on Twitter, it's got a lot of action. People were declaring this was more evidence that the media is dead set against the Trump administration, that they're willing to put forward the second lady's email address, part of the whole theory.
All right. Well, George W. Bush back in the news this week promoting a book, his paintings of wounded warriors and veterans. And Matt Lauer on the Today Show asked him a question about one of President Trump's signature phrases against the media. Here's how it went down.
Did you ever consider the media to be the enemy of the American people?
I consider the media to be indispensable to democracy, that we need an independent media to hold people like me to account.
President Bush got so much negative coverage, and some of it for problems in his administration. And now I hear a lot of pundits saying, Bush wasn't such a bad guy.
I wish they'd follow that question up with another question about whether he thinks the media is being fair in general to Republicans versus Democrats. Certainly, if we think back to the Bush administration, lots of accusations. The Bush administration did not view the press as neutral. They saw them as biased, as sort of a special interest group. So it's interesting to hear him now come out and declare the need for a fair. Now, he wasn't also on board very much with the Trump campaign, so you can draw any conclusion there from the way he responded to that.
Right. And George W. Bush is very muted in his criticism of Donald Trump, but clearly he was separating himself from the current president's attack on the press. Susan Frischio, great to see you. Coming up, we'll get a response from Katrina Pearson, now with a pro-Trump organization, and later, Jon Stewart, this is shocking, doesn't think much of how the media are covering Donald Trump. The president hasn't been slamming the press quite so vociferously this week, but he is talking about a media-driven witch hunt on past ties to Russia. Joining us now from Dallas is Katrina Pearson, former campaign official, now spokeswoman for the nonprofit pro-Trump group America First Policies. And welcome to you this morning.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We've been talking about President Trump accusing Barack Obama making this explosive charge of acting like Nixon during Watergate, personally blaming the former president for tapping his phones, for wiretapping Trump Tower during the campaign. Why would he make such a charge without offering any proof?
Well, clearly the president has information that has not been released yet, and I'm sure in the days to come we'll hear more about this. But it's not quite far-fetched to even imagine something like this being done by the Obama administration. I mean, this is the same administration that utilized several agencies to target political opposition with regards to the IRS and the DOJ, which was mentioned earlier on your show. We don't even have to go back too far to see, for example, with the DOJ raid on Gibson Guitar, for using the exact same wood as their competitor. The difference is that the CEO of Gibson was a Republican donor.
Okay, but
so
Katrina,
it's not far-fetched to see that.
Right, but to say it's not far-fetched to imagine it, and to say that the president probably has information that he's not sharing, doesn't rise to the level of anybody in journalism being able to report this is true, this is arguably true. If the president has more information on this, why would he go the Twitter route and not release that information to make his case?
Well, he specifically used Twitter, and you can refer to his Twitter. He says, I just learned. This is something that he was just informed. Obviously, he said that in his statement. And I'm pretty sure we're going to see more of that to come. But where is the evidence, Howard, where Donald Trump was working with the Russians during the campaign? We have been seeing this narrative in the media for months now with zero evidence.
I don't dispute that. All of this investigations and allegations and insinuations may turn out to be nothing. I want to come back to that, but let me ask you this. You have Breitbart doing an article that we know was circulated in the White House about stuff that Mark Levin said on the radio, past hints, reports, New York Times, The Guardian, and others about whether the FBI was seeking some kind of approval from the FISA National Security Court to go after devices or do eavesdropping at Trump Tower. That is not the same as saying that Barack Obama personally authorized this. So is the president here reacting to an article in Breitbart, which is obviously a favored publication at the White House?
Well, I mean, if you just look at the last administration again, I mean, this is the same administration where the president used an alias to communicate with Hillary Clinton on the illegal server. The statement that came out today with regards to Obama says that they in no way would have interfered with an investigation, but we know for a fact that the FBI wanted to investigate the Clinton Foundation, and Obama's administration stepped in. So again, this too is not far-fetched.
All right. Now, the Washington Post, as you know, reported this week that Jeff Sessions had given what we might say was an incomplete answer to the Senate Judiciary Committee during his confirmation about a couple of past contacts with the Russian ambassador. That story, as far as we know, was accurate, and the Attorney General, on his own, made the decision to recuse himself from any investigation involving Russia or the campaign. The president later said this is all a witch hunt, and Democrats haven't accepted the outcome of the election. Why is it a witch hunt to report something that turned out to be true, at least on the press's part?
Well, because really there's no there. Jeff Sessions answered the question that was asked to him in the capacity that he was part of the campaign. Of course, a senator has interactions with foreign officials, and that's not the question that was asked to him. You know, I don't think he should have recused himself, but he did so, as he said he would, and in looking at each case individually, and because he was essentially considered a part of the campaign, he recused himself.
All right, let me come back to your larger point, which is all of these stories and investigations and allegations going back to who in the campaign or Trump associates had contacts with people from Russia, including the Russian ambassador. Do you think the media are pursuing this because they have a sense that there is a there there, that there's something nefarious at the heart of this, or just because there are a lot of unanswered questions about these contacts, some of which have not been disclosed until now?
No, I think this particular attack on the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, was specifically to remove all of the coverage from the amazing speech that the president gave. He gave a speech where you had Republicans and Democrats agreeing the country was coming together around this president, and the media was not going to let that happen.
We talked about that. Do you believe the timing of the story was deliberate to cut off the positive publicity? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Democrats are notorious for knowing how to change the narrative. They've done this before, and the difference this time is you have a Republican administration that's going to fight back.
Right. Well, that assumes that Democrats somehow were able to push the Washington Post story, and I don't know what the sources were. Okay. Finally, Kellyanne Conway, this thing went viral. We're going to talk about this later. The photo of her on the couch. Democratic Congressman Cedric Richmond told a horrible sexual joke about this, something to do with her position and a certain past Oval Office scandal. And some Democrats, a few at least, including Chelsea Clinton, denounced it. Do you think the congressman's awful joke about Kellyanne deserved more media attention?
I think it deserved not just media attention, but I think also all of the women's groups out there should have come out into Kellyanne Conway's defense. If this had been a Republican who said something similar, they would be demanding a resignation. They would be demanding his wife leave him. Because right now we see Ivanka Trump being targeted for something her dad said over a decade ago. But yet this congressman can get away with it because he's a Democrat and the media is not going to pursue it.
Well, I for one, think that kind of humor has absolutely no place, and I think it probably did deserve, it undoubtedly did deserve more coverage and more criticism. Katrina Pearson, great to see you. Thanks very much.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Ahead, more on the bogus outrage over that Kellyanne Conway photo. But first, the New York Times media columnist on the president's escalating attacks on that newspaper. President Trump ratcheted up his attacks even further this week against what he calls the failing New York Times. He told Breitbart that when it comes to the Times, the intent is so evil and so bad. Joining us now from Long Island is Jim Rutenberg, media columnist for the New York Times. And Jim, that word evil is so loaded. Isn't there a natural human tendency by people at your paper to dig in against President Trump when he makes these kinds of attacks?
I think at this point the answer to that's actually no. I mean, evil is so over the top that I think it's time where it just gets tuned out at this point. You just have to focus on doing the work. But it is a strong word, evil.
You write that Republicans should challenge President Trump about all this. Quote, if there was ever a moment for government leaders who believe that true information unearthed by independent news sources is vital to our nation to stand up and say so, this would be it. But Jim, most Republicans think the press is unfair to their side and have felt that for a very long time.
Well, as you showed earlier in the broadcast here, you know, President George W. Bush stepped forward and said, you know, the press does play a vital role. And believe me, like we both know that he did not love the press, and indeed, you know, always thought we had it in for him. But even he saw the role. And I think the point of my column was basically when true information is questioned through the press, that serves no one. So you could see Republican opponents of President Trump's down the line wanting to forward some true stats or data to make a policy argument, and if true data is knocked down so easily, it underserves them. But I argue it underserves the president in the long run too.
But even if stories reported by the New York Times and the Washington Post and others are legitimate, the sheer volume, and I would argue sometimes the tone, has been so relentless. I mean, can you really say that these newspapers, for example, had the same level of aggressiveness and skepticism toward Barack Obama in his first week in office?
I don't know if we saw the same climate at the beginning of the Obama administration. I mean, I think that even the Trump administration would say they came in to really shake things up. he has never been in office before. So this has been an extraordinary beginning of an administration. So I just don't know. It's like a complete apples and oranges comparison.
Right, except when you come to the question of fairness. And you raised this yourself during the campaign, writing in another column that if reporters view the Trump presidency, at that time just a possibility, as potentially dangerous, their reporting would reflect that. They would move closer than they've ever been to being oppositional. And you said, this is back in August, balance has been on vacation since Mr. Trump stepped onto the golden Trump Tower escalator. So that's a question a lot of people have, which is, whether reporters think they're saving the world or not, have they changed the standards for reporting on this presidential candidate who's now president?
Well, I'm glad you brought that column up, because if you read that column down to its conclusion, what it said was report the facts wherever they may lead. And that is our job. So sometimes campaigns, and I've said this would go for either campaign, and that it, by no means would it mean going easy at all on then candidate Clinton, is report the facts wherever they take you, and it is what it is. Now, to your point, over the last year, has tone sometimes been a little hot across the media? Probably. People should mind their P's and Q's to just report the news in as straight a way as they can. But this is an extraordinary administration. President Trump is an extraordinary political figure, and there's going to be a different way of covering him. It's just, what we're seeing unfold before our eyes.
It's an extraordinary administration, but we are also at a time when there's extraordinarily low levels of trust in the media. Some of that is a hangover for the campaign, which most of the press completely and totally botched and misread. And so I think, we all have to keep in mind that our credibility here is on the line as well, if it seems like we're piling on. Now, let me get you to weigh in on the subject, the presidential tweets accusing Barack Obama of having wiretapped Trump Tower. The way in which that's being covered, the New York Times headline today says offering no proof, and it's true, he did offer no proof, but what is the challenge here for reporting on this kind of presidential allegation?
Well, I think it's just that. Here's this amazing, huge allegation. So we need to drive for evidence. And so if there isn't any, we need to say it. Because if you do that headline, and this is a big debate, you'll see it unfold on Twitter and kind of publicly, and I'm sure other shows like this one, is if you do that headline, President Trump accuses predecessor of spying on him, that's a very flat statement. And if there's no evidence, I think you do have to say there's no evidence. But we'll keep reporting. I think this is going to potentially shake loose some new details that everyone will be interested to find out, including the administration.
Right. Well, I'm all for more reporting. I'm also for fairness, and I think you're saying that, but you see it in a little bit different way. Jim Rutenberg of the New York Times, really appreciate the chance to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks so much for having me.
Good to see you. After the break, more on President Trump's unproven wiretapping allegation against President Obama and the phony outrage. Really want to get into this over that Kellyanne photo. So where did the media go from here on the story of President Trump's unproven wiretapping charges against former President Obama? All right, Aaron, it's a thermonuclear charge. The president has done this before on Twitter without providing evidence. Will the media still be pursuing this a week from now, or will there be other controversies and this will just sort of fade into the background?
Of course we will still pursue it because it's part of this larger Russia issue. Right. I think there are a number of questions that need to be answered. One, where's the evidence? Is there an investigation going on, and what can we get about that? I also think we haven't heard anything about what the Russians actually think about what's going on right here with this story.
Well, the Russians have criticized some of this.
Some, but there's not a whole lot of coverage of what Moscow thinks of what we're talking about right now. I don't think. I think the media can
let me, they're not saying a whole lot.
I also think at some point we might hear from President Obama, because these allegations have been made against him. President Obama was supposed to be quiet after the new president took over. I think possibly we could hear a little bit more from him.
All right.
And then there is also the question of context. Why were all of these Trump associates meeting with Russians? Which is a question that we haven't answered yet.
What do you think about the point made by Katrina Pearson and other Trump defenders that ultimately there's nothing at the bottom here, that the media can chase all of this stuff about who met with who, which Trump associates, and how much time they spent with the Russian ambassador, but there is no nefarious conspiracy at the heart of this, and the media almost want that to be true?
They may, but it is clear from the way that the president is acting and some of what he is saying that that there is some reason that he is after this story, and he is continuing to have the media chase it. I think the president is complicit in making this a story.
Well, certainly when he blasts out things on Twitter, he makes it more of a story. He fuels it. At the same time, I also think some of this has to do with his foreign policy that a lot of the bipartisan experts here in Washington don't like, of taking a more cooperative approach to Vladimir Putin and Russia. And some people see that as raising questions. But he won an election saying those very things. All right. In the Department of Stupid Stuff, look what happened when this photo of Kellyanne Conway went viral. In the Oval Office, on the couch, feet under her. The New York Post was Kellyanne Conway raised in a barn. The Root. Get your feet off that damn White House couch. Kellyanne Conway, one tweeter wrote, when your staff is straight out of the trailer, come on, give me a break. Did the internet go haywire on various occasions when President Obama did this? I don't think so. Kellyanne addressed her shocking behavior with Lou Dobbs.
And I really want to thank so many of them for coming to my defense, because they were in the room and they know I was being asked to take a picture in a crowded room with the press behind us. And I was asked to take a certain angle and was doing exactly that. I certainly meant no disrespect.
This was a meeting of people from the officials from the historically black colleges. Why did this go so viral, and why were there so many cheap shots taken? And is there a little whiff of sexism here?
There may be. I think in part because Kellyanne Conway has been such a big figure in the news of late and has taken on a lot of criticism, so people love to continue that criticism. But you and I both are in television. We know that photographers do whatever they can to get the shot.
They
so
will
that's
knock people over, crawl over people, and so forth.
That's right.
Right. But so that's interesting. The fact that she is probably the most visible defender of President Trump in terms of the person who often goes on TV. You think it's true, like, you know, if she wears something colorful, she gets knocked. But I guess the media go along with it because it's hot on Twitter. Everybody wants to be tapped into the viral thing. But, I mean, it's so bogus. She didn't do anything. It's just a photo of her taking a photo.
Yeah, that's right. You know, I'm sure there are people who did a double take when they saw her sitting as she was. But, you know, again, she is a controversial figure, and there's always a zeitgeist around that, and so that's what people glommed onto.
All right, my response to the critics is, get a life. Erin, thanks very much. And that's it for this edition of Media Buzz. I'm Howard Kurtz. Thanks for joining us. We hope you'll like our Facebook page. Check it out. Give us a like. Post a lot of original content there and respond to your comments. Continue the conversation on Twitter as well, at Howard Kurtz. Somehow I think I don't have to invite people to do that because I get plenty of tweets, particularly after each show. And if you happen to miss our program, DVR it. Set your dials up there so you can watch it at your convenience. I also appear on Sirius XM Radio. 24/7 headlines with a Media Minute. You might enjoy that as well. We continue some of the same things, and we're back here next Sunday. See you then with the latest buzz.